for those that don't know me, I'm Howard Callahan. I'm with the Department of Ag's Nutrient Management Program. I work with basically the farmers in Talbot, Queen Anne's, Kent County. This is my territory. I work out of an office in Easton and Talbot County. Again, some of the stuff in this presentation is probably not relevant to some of you. Just as a show of hands, is there anybody in here that's not farming in the state of Maryland? Just to give me a feel. So I guess count your blessings maybe, I don't know. or be aware of what maybe is coming, who knows. But just for nutrient management purposes, and I'm making, because there's a lot of faces in here that I do not recognize, I have never seen, so I'm assuming you're from other parts of the state, or we've just never crossed paths, I'm not sure, but I'm assuming you know what nutrient management is and why you gotta have it and who it pertains to. Some assumptions I'm making. Again, I have no problem with anybody asking questions. Raise your hand as I go along, because I'd rather be a little interactive than not. Won't be quite as boring. I'm open to comments as long as they're moderate comments, you know. Yeah. So anyhow, if you're under nutrient management and you have a nutrient management plan on file with the Maryland Department of Ag, annual reports is the season right now. Basically, an annual report is something that everybody has to file with the department, assuming you're under nutrient management, have a plan on file with us. They're due to the department by March 1. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's basically a bright green form this year. That in a nutshell is the form is 3 pages. That's page 1. Comes through with name and address already pre-filled at the top, but everything else you just basically walk through, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. That's just another page of it. It goes through, tells you who's your plan writer, what's the dates of your plan, you're signing it basically saying I'm keeping a current plan, so forth. Then in a nutshell, that's the heart of the plan, of the annual report. What crops did I grow? What nutrients did I apply from a commercial source or from manures or sewage sludge or any other organic product? Is anybody in here using manure? A little bit, but very little. Anyhow, these are some things in the regulations that have basically changed or in the last few years. Some things are more new or a little newer than others. But anyhow, if you're applying manure, spring application, summer, whenever, they have to be incorporated within 48 hours. That's just a Maryland regulation. If you're doing things in the fall, you have to have a cover crop on them at a minimum. And basically, we're getting away from allowing winter applications. They're basically being phased away shortly. I mean, currently you can do them under some restrictions, but it's just something that if you're dealing with manure and livestock, you need to be aware of. Needless to say, there's a few exceptions to incorporation, such as animals on pasture, land for hay, blah, 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 highly erodible land. I'm not going to go through all that in detail. Winter applications is something I wanted just to stress because, again, if you're dealing with livestock, we've got to get away from winter applications, so you basically have got to get adequate storage to get you through the winter season if you don't have it. So basically now we need to be thinking about realistic plans to accomplish this, because basically it comes in July 2016, which is creeping up on us pretty close, that other than depending on the size of your operation, it's basically no longer allowed in the state of Maryland. So again, come July 2016, no winter application for any farm that has more than 50 animal units. In other words, if you're a small farm, you basically have got until July of 2020. They're phasing that in. So just something to be aware of. Again, if you're stockpile, we can stockpile manure that are stackable, such as poultry litter or something that's pretty prevalent in this region. But again, it's some guidelines of how and where you can stack. Nutrient application setbacks is something that's relatively new. It actually went into some regulations in 2012. I think took effect in 2014. But still, it's kind of new on the horizon. It's something that we're starting to focus on a little more than we had been as far as getting that addressed. Again, if you have a nutrient management plan, it's being prepared by a certified consultant. The consultant is aware of these things. These things get built into your nutrient management plan, but you as the operator just need to be aware of them. And basically what is required is you have to have a nutrient application setbacks from surface water. And basically you have to have a permanent 10-foot vegetative buffer. and it's measured from the edge of the surface water. And basically, it's perennial and intermittent streams in the heart. It's not ditches. It's the obvious water. Most cases, I don't think we're farming right on top of those, at least in this region. Again, it's ephemeral streams. Doesn't include field ditches. Again, it went into effect in 2014. Basically, again, depending on your method of application, if you're doing a broadcast method, in other words, you're spinning nutrients on, and this is focused on nitrogen and phosphorus, you actually got to have a 35-foot setback. So it's 10 foot of permanent vegetation, and then there would be another 25 foot that you can be growing your crop in, but you're not supposed to be slinging nitrogen or phosphorus in it. If it's directed, sprayed out of a boom, banded, hand applied, in your case, maybe some case, then you can go right up to the 10-foot buffer. But again, these are things that would be identified in your plan by your consultant, so you as the operator know what's going on, know what's being asked of you to do. Again, it talks about setbacks for livestock. This is relevant in other parts of the state more than it is here because we don't have much livestock out on pasture. But it even applies basically from keeping your livestock out of that setback area. So it doesn't say you got to have fencing, but in reality, you probably got to have mandatory stream fencing in a lot of cases. Some cases, you know, you can work with the district and then come up with some alternatives and some stream crossing and some alternative waterings and so forth. But are things just to be aware of. Again, it's just a table, helps lay out a little bit of what I'm talking about. Sometimes it gives you a little visual observation. and the key is, if the water course is natural and it's either perennial or intermittent, then it's classified as a stream. A setback is going to apply. If it's channelized, and now we're getting into ditches to some degree, at least here on the eastern shore. Channelized and it's perennial, in other words, and our definition of perennial is water's flowing 365 days a year. So it can flow part of the year, it's not in. So at a minimum, if it's channelized, it has to be perennial, and then it also must be meeting either A, B, or C. So if it's channelized and it's perennial, it has to either be in the floodplain soil map unit, or it has to be lies within a hydraulic soil map unit, or it has to be on a B slope or greater. In those scenarios, it's still considered a stream, a setback would apply. If it's just channelized, a ditch, and it's intermittent, in other words, it's not flowing 365 days a year, it's still considered a ditch, setbacks do not apply. So it doesn't apply to everything, it's kind of the most obvious. Those are the things that we're working with consultants to try to get those things sorted out. If you have to do it, this kind of gives you a little visual of, hey, how we're measuring. It's not necessarily always from the top of the bank. Again, the setbacks are required to be addressed in your plan by your consultant so that you, the operator, know what's basically expected of you. To jump to something else, PMT, Phosphorus Management Tool. Again, it may not be relevant to a lot of you because I'm assuming a lot of you don't have excessive soil test phosphorus levels because of what you're growing. But if you do, and you're still trying to apply phosphorus, which in most cases you would not in your scenario with small fruits. But if you do, PMT comes into play, basically was put into effect in June of this year. It's something that's been talked about in the state of Maryland for several years. It's replacing the phosphorus site index, which is something that we currently have. And basically where this kicks in is if you have excessive soil test phosphorus levels based on your soil test level, and you're still trying to apply phosphorus, this tool has to be done to look at the environmental risk of applying phosphorus to this site. And it's basically going to put you into a category that may or may not have a restriction. PMT basically is more restrictive, latest and greatest, compared to the phosphorus site index. Again, it has a 7-year implementation schedule, has a 2-year transition period, which is starting now, basically 2016 and 2017, and then it starts to get phased in between 2018 and 2022, with it being fully implemented in the state by 2022. Again, the 5-year phase-in period, for the next 2 years as a consultant in a nutrient management plan, again, assuming this is relevant to you, they're supposed to run the PSI, because that's what's still regulatory, and the PMT for the next 2 years, so you as the operator can see this is the effect that may happen to me down the road. In other words, it's kind of educational tool, we'll call it. So you could make educated decisions if you're going to have to change something. Another thing that's part of the PMT that was required, certified consultants, license holders, basically people that are writing plans with us at the department, as of September the 30th of last year, 2015, and they're supposed to do it again 6 years later, were required to submit all soil test phosphorus levels to the Maryland Department of Ag. And that's something that, again, that's so from a state perspective, they're going to try to get a better handle on what the phosphorus soil test levels are out there on a county basis. And they broke it out by zip code, so what that can get you. But it's not necessarily on a watershed level. But again, it's going to give some better understanding of suspicions, I guess, that are already out there of where are the high phosphorus levels and where are the more moderate phosphorus levels. Some of that's going to be used in probably relocation of manure in a lot of cases. Where does it need to go away from, and where are potential opportunities to take it to? Again, based on that soil test data, there's going to be some information that farmers basically are going to get, assuming a PMT is relevant to you, are going to get put into a category of a tier that determines how and when you have to implement. In other words, it's part of the phase-in process. Basically, in Tier C, it's going to begin in 2018, and they'll be fully implemented. In other words, they're going to start a little bit of a phase-in. In other words, they're going to say, come 2022, you might be going to have to go to no manure use again at all. And maybe currently you're at 2 tons of poultry manure. Well, somewhere between 2018 and 2022, they're going to wean you away from it. So the phase-in is basically going to say, well, maybe we got to cut back to this level, we're going to cut back to this level, but transitioning you to the 2022 period. If you're Tier B, it's just going to start a year later. It's just going to transition you a little later. If you're Tier 3, it's again, you're going to not really start till a little later. Basically, in a nutshell, which I'll go through this, it's on some other slides. The higher your soil test level is, the sooner you're going to start transitioning, because you're the one that's going to have the biggest impact on you. So they're giving you the most time to make adjustments is what it's coming down to. Again, it's phased in on time, phased in on the risk. Basically, farms with the greatest impact get separated out, get put into the tiers. Tiers are defined based on the soil test. Basically, if you don't have a soil test that's greater than 150 on the FIV scale in Maryland, none of this applies to you. It's soils that have a 150 or greater, still using phosphorus in a sense. And then basically how the tiers are defined is that the consultant or the farmer is going to have to do a report to MDA. All of the fields that are 150 or greater in that operation, so it's not on this location, it's everything under your management. So it could be a farm over here and a farm over here and a farm over here if that's what's in your management. You can take all the soils that are 150 or greater. So if I got 4 of them, then you're going to take all those, add them up, divide by 4, and that's your average FIV over 150 score. That determines when and how you have to implement, what category that you're going to get phased into. Again, it's done one time. You're going to get allocated to a tier, and that's where you're going to work from. Again, Tier Group C is only when you have an average soil test, and it's again average of your 150 plus numbers, so the low ones don't have an effect to bring you down. It's looking at the high. Tier C, basically, which is going to start the first, is the ones with the highest level. They're 450 and above. So again, they're going to start the first. They're going to get transitioning sooner than others. Tier C is an average of soil test FIVs from 300 to 450. They're the second group to start. Tier A is basically from 150 to 300. So they're ones with the more moderate. So they're going to get a little later transition. I mean, you can start sooner, but this is regulatory, mandatory when you and how you would have to start. Basically, if you're under Tier C, starting in 2018 and 19, in other words, 16 and 17 is educational for everyone. But the guys with the highest, over 450 soil tests, average, are going to have to start transitioning to the PMT. In 2018 and 2019, they're going to go under what's Phase 1 guidelines. And then 2 years of Phase 2 guidelines. And then ultimately to PMT in 2022. It's going to be a lot to keep straight. But in a nutshell, it's transitioning you from here to here to here to here. It's a step approach. Again, Tier B, you're going to start Phase 1 in 2019, Phase 2 in 2020 and 21, everybody to PMT in 2022. Tier A, which is the ones that are a little lower, start phasing in 2020 and 2021 and go to PMT in 2022. Basically, in transition management, tier management 1, the same as Phase 1, same you got 2. In tier management 1, if the PMT risk is low, in other words, this is assuming you've run the PMT, because it's basically when you run the PMT, it's going to put your situation, your soil test, your management, your amount of P into a risk category. It's going to say it's a low risk, it's a medium risk, it's a high risk. So again, assuming in tier management 1, if the PMT risk was low or medium, P can be applied at a rate not to exceed crop removal over 3 years. So it's just basically saying that's my limit while I'm transitioning. If you have, it may not affect you at all at that point. If the PMT risk is high, in other words, we're saying, well, this is a high risk that eventually is going to lead you to not allowing this to happen. P shall be limited to crop removal of the crops immediately following the P application not to exceed 2 crops. So this is more restrictive than this. Same thing in tier management 2, if the risk is low, P can be applied crop removal 3 years. If it's medium, P applied not to exceed the crop removal for 2 crops. If PMT risk is high, P shall be limited to 50% of the crop removal of the crops immediately following. So again, it's a phase in. If your risk is higher, you got to start backing off a little quicker. If the soil test sample on any field that you have has an analysis indicates a PFIV of 500 or greater, no additional phosphorus can be applied. This is in effect now. Boom, flat out. As of June 2015, when that went into effect, if you have any soils that are 500 or greater, they are not allowed to get any phosphorus in the state of Maryland from any source. And then the rest, like I say, are getting phased in. Again, the PMT only applies to anybody that has a soil test that's between 150, because if you're less than 150, you don't have to do the PMT or the PSI, and up to 499, because 500, you're done. So again, if your soil test P levels are less than 150, none of this applies to you at all. So it doesn't apply to everyone. PMT basically changes the management requirements for farms that are required to use the tool. Subsurface drainage of water is a big driver in the PMT risk, subsurface movement of water, which is a big thing on the shore, especially on the lower shore, where we've got more poorly drained soils, a lot of ditches. That one item alone can raise your risk pretty high, no matter other things not being too high. Distance to surface water, and that's no matter where you are. If your field is pretty close to surface water, and when I say pretty close, probably within a couple hundred feet. If the edge of that field's within a couple hundred feet of surface water, that is going to be a big value assigned in that PMT. And either one of those or those two together, if you meet that criteria, are probably going to come out at a pretty high risk in the PMT. And another one is kind of new, is your degree of P saturation. This is something that's measured hopefully by your soils lab here on the shore. I know AgriLab, which is in Delaware, which we use a fair amount of soil samples to go through, does that routinely in their soil analysis, along with the University of Delaware. A lot of other labs do not, but they are certainly capable and are supposedly getting geared up to do this. This is something that basically is measuring the saturation level of your soil with P. In other words, my soil test and your soil test may be, we'll say, identical. They're both excessive, but my soil type is a lot of sand, your soil type is a lot of clay. Mine is probably more saturated with P. In other words, my sponge is pretty well full. His sponge may not be as full because he has more binding capabilities in his soil. So that P saturation is helping sort out, again, what's the risk in my soil without relying totally on soil test. So that's something that if you're sending soil samples away and you know that these criteria are going to meet you, you should be getting that saturation level. There's a short term, there's a There's a tool that can be used to do with the iron and the aluminum in the soil, and they can do an estimated value, and that is okay for the short term. But long term, we got to get this degree of P saturation. So something to think about if it's relevant to you. Again, the transition is built in incremental changes. It's especially for operations that are scoring high. In other words, your score is greater than 100 in the PMT calculation. Again, just to go through real quick, because if not, I'll never get through it. It creates transitional management to get you where you want to go. If your PMT score is 0 to 50, you're low risk. If you're 51 to 100, you're medium. If you're greater than 100, you're considered high. Again, you're going to transition in depending on what category you're in, what category your soil tests are in. So it's a phased-in approach. Again, these are things that are going to get built into your plan. That's just a table that basically reiterates what I just went through. On-farm implementation reviews. That's basically what I do in this region. There are 9 of me throughout the state of Maryland that are doing implementation reviews of nutrient management plans. We go out on farms. We send notices. We give notice that we're coming. And we're going to review nutrient management plans to make sure what you've got is current, is relevant to what your operation is. Setbacks have been addressed. PMT has been run if need be, whatever it is. So we're kind of reviewing the plan to some degree. And then we're reviewing the implementation of that. What did you as the operator do as far as nutrient applications? Did you implement what was being asked of you? Again, MDA is conducting these. We do them year round. Sometimes they go up and down because we're dealing with other things too. Like when you have to do an annual report, your annual reports go back to your regional office. So currently we're bogged down with them to some degree, but we're still out there doing these things. In fiscal year 2015, MDA conducted 189 audits throughout the state. 772 of those were completely random. 118 were targeted. The targeted reviews are coming about by something that has come up. You got something on your annual report that's not right, looks fishy, looks funny. There's a good chance somebody's going to come and see you. So that's kind of a targeted review. If we think something is going on based on what we see, what we hear, whatever, you may get pulled. But most of them are done randomly. Of the random reviews, 69% were in compliance with what we considered was necessary. Of the targeted reviews, only 28%. As you can see, the targeted ones, we've already got some suspicion before we get there that there's a problem, and it kind of pans out. But again, if that's where we feel like we need to focus our resources, because like everything else, they're limited, then that's what we're going to do. It's a review of your latest nutrient management plan compared against your nutrient application records. You may need to verify buffers, setbacks. It may be something we need to physically go see, but the bulk of what we're looking at is paperwork and record keeping. Again, my region is just Kent, Queen Anne's, Talbot counties here on the shore. In fiscal year 2015, I personally did 136 random reviews, with 76% of them were in compliance. So it varies throughout the state, depends on what you're looking at, but it's just something that, it's getting attention in the state of Maryland. I think it will continue to get attention. Just want to make everybody aware of what's going on. Just, hey, if nutrient management is relevant to you, keep your plans up to date. Keep records of any nutrient applications that you're applying. Keep records of yields that you're harvesting to support what you're fertilizing for. That's all relevant. So again, keep your plans current. Keep records of your nutrient applications, whether it's manure, sludges, compost, makes no difference. If it's got nutrients in it, it's a nutrient. You got to keep records of it. Keep track of your yields, because that's supporting what you're doing. Follow your nutrient application setbacks if they're a requirement in your plan. And then again, keep your nutrient applicator vouchers current if that's relevant to you. And like I say, today you're qualified from this training to get credits if you either need a voucher or you need to renew a voucher. Mike's got the sign-in sheets. You'll have them later. So the main thing is you sign that sign-in sheet. What's required in the state of Maryland is if you physically yourself applied nutrients to 10 acres or more of land cumulatively in the course of a year, you're required by law to have a nutrient applicator voucher. If you hire it done by someone else, you physically don't need it. If you do less than 10 acres, you don't need it. But it is something that's under the nutrient management law and something we're going to ask you for if we come out and do a review. So again, if you got questions, I'm here for a little while. My contact information is on there, phone numbers, email works great for me because I'm in and out of the office a lot, but my ultimate goal was to help you get where you need to be. Again, that's where you can find me. And I didn't want to miss lunch, so we made it. Anybody got any questions? Wait a minute. Yes, sir.
What is the state going to do with all this chicken manure? Yeah.
Did everybody hear the question?
No.
He basically said, what is the state going to do when they realize that all this manure can't be applied to the land? I think the first thought was they were going to bring it to your house. Is that okay? No. I think at this point, from the state perspective, MDA perspective, we're not getting the impression that it's not going to be able to be applied to the land. It's just going to have to be relocated on within the land. If that makes sense to you. In other words, there's going to be land that it cannot be used on, but I think the assumption is being made there is other land that it can be used on, so it's a relocation of that manure. I think that's what the biggest hat is getting hung on at this moment, I can tell you. Correct. There is a lot of cost to relocate the manure. Currently, the state of Maryland, through the Department of Ag's MAX program, has cost share help available with that transport. It all requires nutrient management plans. It shows you got to have a need to move it. Shows you got to have a site that's suitable in our eyes to receive it. There's some help in relocating some of that. So if you have any desire in that, go to your local soil conservation district. That's where you're going to apply. Hopefully that answers your question to some degree.
Is there any truth that they're going to put a chicken manure site in Annapolis on a great big hill over there?
I haven't heard that yet. But it's possible. You never know. Yes, ma'am.
I want to know the different tiers. Are people being put into that individually or according to what everybody's come up, the average for the county, or?
You're getting put into that tier. The question was, how are, I guess, you getting assigned to a tier? The tier is getting assigned to you based on your operation and your operation only, and looking at your soil test within your operation.
Okay, because I know you said something about the zip code and county. And
well, when the soil tests were submitted, they had to be submitted. They were submitted anonymously. So in other words, let's just make the assumption that this lady is a farmer in the state of Maryland, has a nutrient management plan that was done in the state of Maryland, has soil tests. Her consultant submitted soil tests. When they came in, we didn't know that they were her soil tests versus your soil tests, because they came in and basically said, this is the county they came from and this is the zip code that they came from. That was it. And then there was another submittal separate that just listed people that supposedly have been submitted. But we don't know whose soil samples are whose. So from that, we don't have any idea who has the high ones and who has the low ones. We just know what county and what zip code they're in. There's going to be a secondary submittal come this year that's going to put you into the tiers. So then in that scenario, you, I think this is my understanding, you as the operator are going to let MDA know that my consultant did this analysis for me, and he said my average over 150 FIV is 275. That's going to assign you a tier. So it's unique to you. Yes?
Have they done any projections of how many years they think they're going to apply land that they're using the transport area? Because I see a lot of chicken houses going up.
I don't think it's something that we have a great handle on. I think my opinion only, long term, there's going to have to be some alternative to land application. I think, and I don't know, and I think a lot of people realize that, but no one's come up with something that's realistically, economically feasible.
Not only do we have less land, we're looking at congested roads and all.
Correct. So I think relocation is somewhat of a short-term solution, not a long-term solution.
Are you going to be around?
Yes. Okay, anybody else got any quick questions? Because if not, we're going to eat, I think.
Yeah, before you leave, I do have a couple of things, but thank you very much, Howard. We appreciate that.